My name is Heather Harris, and I am the Educational Programs Manager at the Art Museum of West Virginia University. Thank you all for joining us for this afternoon's iteration of our Lunchtime Looks series. First, a couple of technical notes. Live captioning is going to be available for this event. So if you wish to avail yourself of that option, you can press the caption button on your Zoom app. Where it's located is a little dependent on what device you're using, but usually either at the top or the bottom. Also, there is going to be time today for a little bit of Q&A with our speaker. And we are going to do that through the Q&A function. So rather than the chat. If you have a technical question or issue with, audio or screen sharing or things like that, you can throw it in the chat. But if you have something about the content or for our speaker today, we ask that you use the Q&A, and I will come back on and moderate that discussion after our artist talk. So with those little bits of information, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Jared Thorne. Thorne holds a BA in English Literature from Dartmouth College and an MFA from Columbia University. He is currently an assistant professor in the art department at The Ohio State University and has done some remarkable work in photography, including his series entitled 26 Planned Parenthoods, which is currently on display in the Art Museum of WVU's exhibition In Conversation with Walker Evans for Photographers, which we hope you will book a ticket to see at the museum, through April 25th. Sorry, I was getting a little stumbly with my dates there, but we have a few more weekends left. We're open Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and you can book a ticket to come see us anytime on those days, now through April 25th. And without further ado, I'm going to invite Jared to join me on screen. We're so lucky to have him here today, and get ready to hear from him about his work, both that's featured in the museum, plus a little bit more of his repertoire. So thank you very much, Jared, and we're very happy to have you here today.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we had a little freeze there, but I think you're smoothing out, so we'll be okay.
All right, good. Yeah, so I'm gonna begin. I want to first start out by obviously thanking Heather and Todd for inviting me. Yeah, I was when Todd approached me about the show, I was super flattered. It's interesting how I think the role that Walker Evans plays just in the history of photography. And so I think it is, especially as it relates to American photography. And so like he's a huge influence. I assign him to my students. And so, yeah, I was really excited. Today what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go through 3 bodies of work that I think speak to my practice, of course, but I think the connection, sometimes looser and sometimes stronger than to Walker Evans, and just kind of explain, some of the art process, if you will. So this first body of work I'm going to show is called The Bottom, and it started out about some time ago, before I was in grad school, and then when I was in grad school, and I was really interested in public housing and the housing that the government essentially gives to people who are less fortunate to live in. And so in The Bottom, it comes from a Toni Morrison quote in Sula, but it's less focusing on that. But I want to show you that I used to shoot primarily with like a 35 millimeter Nikon FM. I never had a Leica because I never could afford a Leica, but that way of looking. So it was handheld. Go forward. Yeah, so I'm going to show you some of these. And yeah, it was like this idea, I was in it. I felt like I was like in the world. I'm taking like my camera there. But one thing I am doing in the photographs are between San Francisco and New York City. I looked at public housing in both areas. And so I'm doing this work in grad school, and I feel like I'm trying to say these things about specifically about Black culture, about the landscape and landscape photography. You'll see like these places are often inhabited with people. So just to go back, like I'm interested in this idea of like this all-seeing eye and the panopticon, and like what are these spaces and like what do they look like? What do they feel like? Look at these. Yeah, what is it that we see on a daily basis when you're in these spaces? Kind of go through these. Right, like for instance, I think this image in particular, this is in San Francisco. This is in Potrero Hill. And I was very much, yeah, just the idea like this reminds me of prison. And so what, yeah, how does one speak about language as it relates to photography and how it relates to like architecture? Um, but it's like I feel like you're always trying to say something, but are you really saying it? And yeah, I'm gonna go through these fast, a little faster because I want to show you the work subsequent to this. Um, so I'm looking at this. Yeah, literally, it's like it's like this idea of grid. It's like on the ceiling. And then it almost appears like this body bag. It's not obviously, but this is like my first kind of entree into kind of creating things that aren't really there necessarily. I feel like I was like this strict kind of documentarian. And then I made this photograph, and I was like, okay, I think this is what I want to say. It's like, so what is like available if you live in the Brownsville like housing projects? And I think the reality is not much, but it's like they offer you like a way to like fight and die for your country. And I was like, okay, I think this is kind of what I'm saying. But I say that to say it took me like almost 2.5 or 3 years to make something that I was like, this is it. I think this is what I wanted to talk about. And you start realizing it's like that's not sustainable. And so it led me to actually look into this. So I didn't have a Liza Linhoff. I didn't have a Linhoff. I actually had a Sonar, and I still have a Sonar. But it allowed me to dabble into large format, and I think that just changed everything. And there was a class that I took with this amazing professor. Her name is Linda Connor. She teaches at the San Francisco Art Institute. I took a class with her, and she does this thing where she shows you, and they're actually slides, and she shows you about 120 slides, and she says, write down the images you like. And so, out of the 120, there's like 23 that really speak to me. And the class goes around, and I'm like, well, I like this one, by Hiroshi Sugimoto, and this other one by Seiju Keita, and there's this one by Walker Evans that I respond to. And I think in my mind, like I like this really diverse thing, but like the only thing that these like 23 photographers have in common is that they're all using large format. And I remember thinking, wow, like I think I just respond to that differently. But I never took a class. And so this is actually the first large format photo I made. I was trying to talk about identity, subjectivity, kind of in the history of advertising. Um, I feel like I had this kind of genius idea, and I really knew it was like this amazing idea because I had this studio visit. I remember with Sarah Z at one point, and like 3 times she's like, "You got to look at Fred Wilson's work." And so I was like, "All right, all right." Like, I think I heard of Fred Wilson, and essentially I knew I had this great idea because Fred Wilson had it like 15 years ago. But nonetheless, I was like, okay, I'm working with these dolls, and I'm like doing really awful emphasis on awful like studio lighting. So this was my setup. I used like my little black puffy coat. I was in New York City at the time, and that snoot lighting is actually a funnel, like a kitchen funnel. And I just didn't know anything, but that's what grad school's for. You learn. But it introduced me to this idea of like being more deliberate. And I think that just like a bit of a setup to then go forward to these images. And so after graduate school, I was a broke artist and I was adjuncting in New York City, like so many people. And then you realize that I was like fortunate to even be able to adjunct. And so I always say it's never good when you're telling yourself that you're not hungry and you're skipping meals. It's just, it's the life, unfortunately, of a recent MFA grad. But so I was there for a semester and I was teaching, and my partner at the time was just like, finishing up their PhD, and was like, let's go to South Africa. And I was like, I'm in like the Mecca, we're in New York City. It's like I had like my color lab there. I had all like the setup, and I was like, I can do this. But it was just like I was broke and it sucked. And yeah, you're making like 18,000. Anyway, point being, uh, moved to South Africa, and I was like, well, let's see if I can make work there. And I started making this series called Black Folk. And I think it very much ties to Walker Evans' work right here. And so, right, we have like the boroughs, right? And I think what's, sorry, it's a pretty awful, it's a pretty bad scan. But what's I think interesting, and I think what's like, I would, if I had a class right now, I would show them these images and I'd be like, what is this work about? I think people would say certain things. Well, it's about maybe farming or it's about portraiture. And to me, when I see a lot of Walker Evans's work, it's about like class. And that's something for me that I'm like thoroughly invested in. And so in the same way, I think he's using his 8x10, I use a 4x5 to explore, I would say like very much race and class, right? So this is very much about whiteness, right? And we now see, they now praise famous men. I think that's it, AG and him. It's like where are these black voices? We're in the South. They're all over the place, but they're not reflected. And so I was like, okay. So I started this series called Black Folk, where I use my 4x5, and I was interested in like this emerging Black middle class, specifically in Cape Town. I was interested in their stories. And to give you an example, so I did all these lengthy interviews. I should say quickly, I used to be a documentarian. I worked for CNN for 5 years before I went to grad school. So I feel like that's this idea of talking and engaging was always there for me. And so I'm talking to people, and it's essentially almost like a two-party system. And I'll go through some of these images. And I should say, so this is Patrick. All the names, all the titles are the names of the individuals. This is Lindiwe. Through a few of these. This is Jamal. Yeah, but a quick example of a story that was shared and told and explained is that, so there's like a two-party system. You have the ANC, and the ANC is the party of Mandela, and it's the party of revolution. And you have the DA. The DA has there's a lot. I could have a dissertation on that. But this idea was that people are just like, the ANC is corrupt. Jacob Zuma was the president at the time, who I think now is being brought up on several charges of corruption and graft and things of that nature. This is in Dewey. Yeah, my notes. Yes. And so they're like, what does it mean that my parents like literally like fought and died for the ANC and I have no connection? And so I was like, those are the things I was interested in, like this, in this emerging Black middle class. It's like, how do they connect with their parents? How do they connect to the past? And these, it's funny, unlike Walker Evans's that are actually quite, a lot of them are just contact prints. These are big, these are 50 by 40 inches. And this was actually the first museum show I had at the South African National Gallery. This is in Osa, and I always butcher her name, and she made fun of me. Look at that. This is Sipololo. So yeah, so this I think is a photograph I often try to stop on. This image was made in a suburb of Cape Town called Goodwood. And in Goodwood is like so many things in Cape Town. Black people during apartheid weren't allowed to live here. And I think it's interesting because it becomes this place where like the walls that we see are literally created so Black people like can't come in. And now when they are in, I feel like it's this pull and tug, and like, are they welcome? And I feel like you have like this empty pool, and sometimes it feels like these dreams deferred, and like, are they thriving? One thing you'll find in Cape Town is that a lot of its Black population moves to Johannesburg, and they're just like, I can't deal with this. I want to be in a city, and a city in Johannesburg that has roughly 20 million people. That's 80, 90+ % Black. In Cape Town is not. Actually, this is actually a former student of mine, Saku. Um, yeah, I should look at my time. Ooh, I should get. And this is there's a gentleman, Sipalele. This is Sipi Lolo, and he's Zulu. Yeah, and one of his interesting stories is this idea where Amiri was saying, like, I mean, I'm from like the farms. He's like, I'm Zulu. And he's a lawyer now in Cape Town, and these ideas where he was, so he goes to this prestigious university. I often compare it to like an Oxford Cambridge thing. And in in South Africa, you have Wits, which is in Johannesburg, and then you have the University of Cape Town. There are other universities, and some are great, but those are like the two big ones. So he goes to the University of Cape Town, gets his law degree. He's a practicing corporate attorney, and he's like, yeah, the whole world I'm in is white. And so he's like, these are the people I know, and he wound up getting involved. And I think, who knows? I think they may be married now. We wound up dating this white woman, and he was like, this idea of what does it mean to bring this white woman like home to my family? And he's like, I'm not from Durban's the big city where he's from. And he's like, I'm like 2 hours outside of that. But I was interested in, I guess, that internal rumblings and those ideas. But once again, I think very much about class and about race. This is Sheila. And this idea of like interiority, which I think Walker Evans does. Just gonna keep it moving. So this search and looking, I was in South Africa for 5 years. I came back. I was really fortunate to get this amazing teaching job at Ohio State University. And I really firmly, yeah. So I made some notes, but we can't do presenter view. But I just wanted to show you guys some landscape photographs. I think has like Walker Evans really like kind of searching in the landscape and looking. Once again, sorry for the bad. Yeah. But once again, him looking and finding things in the South. And I think it very much relates to, yeah, this series I did that's in the museum show right now called 26 Parenthoods. So I came back to the States and I moved to Ohio. My parents live on the East Coast outside New York City. Most of my family's from the East Coast. But I'm in the Midwest, and I say this to students all the time. It's like, if you're not in LA or New York, I think make work about where you are. I think it's important. I, once again, try to take that advice and was like, I don't know Ohio that well, and I need to see what's going on. And so I was interested in landscape photographs. I was interested in this notion of how does one find identity and subjectivity within the landscape. And so I was doing research about Planned Parenthood specifically. Another thing too, actually, I'll back up, is that I do this like not test, but I do this thing in my class every time. We talk about certain issues and we talk about feminism. And I always say, so let's raise our hand. Who's a feminist? And then, sheepishly, I think maybe a quarter of the class or a third of the class. And then we talk about like what it means to be a feminist. And then, so do we not believe in equality for women, or, oh, and I feel like there's these misconceptions around feminism. And I feel sometimes as a feminist, like, what is the work I'm making and doing? Like, is it really there? Is it in the work, or is it just something we say in polite company because it's the right leftist kind of thing to do? And so I was like, no, I think I want to make work that's about that. And I want to make work that talks about, landscape work that's about people. I think my time in South Africa led to that. where everything in South Africa is about land. Because from, I think, the Native People's Land Rights Act of 1913, so for almost like 100 years, if you were Black in South Africa, which is 90% of the population, you could not own land. And so everything is like, how do we get land back? And I think there's so much like politics and power within the land. And I was like, yeah, that operates in the States, we just don't talk about it. So that said, I was like, okay, I want to make this work. And I actually started photographing some Planned Parenthoods on the East Coast, and I was looking at that. And I came here to Ohio, where I am now, and I was like, okay, let's like go out and look. And I actually started, to be frank, I started photographing abortion clinics, and I didn't think that quite worked, and it had a different power. And then I was looking at Planned Parenthoods, and I realized that at the time there were 26 Planned Parenthoods. And I thought there was a unique linkage between this work and the 26 gas stations by Rouchet. And so once again, kind of moving from Walker Evans to the new topographics and really kind of sinking my teeth into that. I should probably move forward on the images. Yeah, I'll move forward. And so, well, I'll stay on this and then I'll move forward. So I started looking at them, and I feel like with Rouchet, I feel like somehow it's almost like the opposite approach, where it's like, really, what can photography do? And I think photography can do everything. I really believe in it. I'm passionate about it. I think it can say things. I think, yeah, I think it's very embedded in a set of politics. Yeah, I wanted to see these spaces in these towns, absent people. It's funny, this is actually, there are two that actually have people. This is in Canton, Ohio. Canton, Ohio is kind of famous for having the Hall of Fame. And it's funny, I'll move there were these protesters over here, and it took me like three or four, almost, yeah, 3.5, 4 years to do this project, mainly because I can only go on Sundays and Sunday mornings because most of the protesters are at church. And so I remember I woke up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, drove to Canton, and it's like 6 something, and there are protesters already there. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. And my politics are very clear. I mean, surprise, surprise, I'm a Black art professor who grew up on the East Coast. Like, I'm pretty left of center. And, you know, they're kind of trying to talk to me, and I was like, trying to be respectful. I was like, we vehemently disagree on what you're doing, but, you know, you have the right to be there. So what it did is that it forced me to kind of recede within. So you can't tell, but there's like this flag over here. I was like, there's this post office. I was right over here. And what it really allowed me to do is kind of recede into the landscape. And I went in the back, and I realized that it's not about like these edifices, it's really about these communities. And I think it's kind of evident. So let me go through the work. Sorry, I was talking a lot. So like I said, that was Canton. This is Dayton, Ohio. This is Rocky River, which is just south of Cleveland. Yeah, and these are all Planned Parenthood facilities. I guess another link I'll speak to is that Planned Parenthood, there are only 3 Planned Parenthoods in Ohio that offer abortion services. There's one in Cincinnati, one in Columbus, and one in Cleveland. So 3 out of the 26, but the other ones only just provide basic women's health, mostly to the poor or those who can't afford. So, and the other stat I'll say quickly is that roughly 32%, 33% of the women who use Planned Parenthood facilities in Ohio are Black and Latino. And I think that was one of the things that really led me to this. And it feels really like an attack on Planned Parenthood. Really feels like an attack on Black and brown bodies specifically. This is in Springfield. These are also 50 by 40 inches. So this has a diptych. It's funny. So it's funny, in the museum, they're, I think, 11 by 14. But I usually show them bigger, but I've never shown them all together. And a curator, a really smart curator, talked me into showing them smaller because I could show them all together. I remember I pushed against it, as many artists do, and he was right. And I'm thankful for that, because it's like I would show 8 or so, maybe 10 at a time, because they're quite big. They're, like I said, this is 80 by 100 inches. And you start to see the landscape, right? So you see like this Midas, and you see the cast for gold over here on the right. Like the Planned Parenthood is actually over here next to the Hibachi Grill. This is in Delaware, Ohio. And I feel like I'm stumbling, as I'm saying a lot, trying to get this all in. But one thing I will say that I think it's important, really, in terms of like conceptually. It's like, so why make this work? Um, and yeah, I fervently believe that, like, so I live in Columbus, and there are these kind of nice suburbs here of New Albany and Upper Arlington. And I think if the constituents in Upper Arlington, or Dublin is another big kind of fancy suburb here, like I wonder if Planned Parenthood would be under attack if the people who occupied those spaces occupied the halls and of Planned Parenthood. I really do feel like it's an attack on class, and it disproportionately affects women of color. This is in Kent, Ohio. And this is in 2016. You start to see like the Trump stickers. It was really odd to really be traversing the landscape of Ohio when everyone just knew there's no way Trump could win. And you start to, when you're driving around, you just start to see, you start to think it's not possible, because how could this even be an idea that people would ascertain? But you realize there was this huge support. Not to revisit old things, but I always feel like one of the main things like the Clinton campaign did wrong was like almost promising more 4 more years of Obama. And then you realize that people in Ohio are like financially just hurting. And even though I think, to be frank, none of Trump's policies have any, it just, they hurt. I mean, the only thing they did was, lower taxes for the rich, essentially. And appoint conservative judges. But nonetheless, it's you could see that people were hurting. And so, like, I always say, like, I live in this town in Columbus that's really flourishing. Like the heyday of Columbus is literally right now. But when you go to Dayton, and you go to Toledo, and you go to Youngstown, and you go to Lorraine, I think I may have this is in Worcester. You go to these cities that are just, they're dying, and it's sad. And I think politicians on both sides of the aisle like aren't looking at that. They're saying, "Oh, Columbus, look, it's growing. Cincinnati's," and it's just, that's not what Ohio is. Ohio is mostly seemingly these dying towns, and the people in them of all stripes are hurting, like, severely. This is Cincinnati, and I would hope in my mind that the work is about that. It's it's like we were looking obviously at this really politically charged space. But it to me, it's the absence of people, I think, makes you think about the people who are in these spaces. This is Toledo. This is Youngstown. This is Hamilton, Ohio. And this is Akron. It's got another diptych. I'm drawing a blank on the name of this town. Apologize. Where is this? I apologize, but I can get back and get that information. Okay. It's 12:31. I think I'm going to try to show one more body of work. It'll be quick, but I think it really relates to Walker Evans. So this is another, in order to show you this, I have to exit my screen, and I'll explain in a second. So I was thinking about like how the work I've made relates to Walker Evans. And the last thing I was thinking, there was this portrait series I did where I re-photograph photographs. And it really starts from, I'll show you from this image right here. I feel like, so this used to hang on my mentor in graduate school, hung on his door. And I just would see it all the time, and it was there, it just had a presence. And the thing that I noticed, like when I notice all these things, I'm just like, it's just like, there's like one or two, but my parents used to describe this as like when the world was white. And it's like, there's just no Black people, but we're in, insert wherever, there's some Black people. And I was just like, this had me thinking. And so sometime later, I was like, you know what, I think I'm interested in like what it means to be this notion of class and race, and at least but in America, and then through my experience. And so what I did is I re-photographed photographs of classroom, like end of the year photographs. I re-photographed them, and I had this installation where I showed, I think there were about 20 of them, and there were 30 by 40 inches, but I had like a sound installation. And what's playing, I'll just tell you ahead because I'm going to play it in a second. It's this message from the grassroots from Malcolm X, I think it's 65 or 68, maybe 65, 65 or 63. Anyway, message from the grassroots. And he has like this militant call for segregation. And this idea, and you can kind of see in the images, like, what does it mean to be like one or two like Black faces dotting these classrooms? And there's this idea, like, is this progress? And so I'm gonna briefly, I got to go out of here just to get my audio, and then I'll come right back. And it'll be 2 minutes and I think 40 seconds, and then it will stop. So it'll be, 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I'll go through some images and then I'll stop. So let me exit this real quick. Here we go. All right, I'm gonna play this. Hopefully it's not too loud.
There was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food where he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. The house Negro, if the master said, we got a good house here, the house Negro said, yeah, we got a good house here. Whenever the master said we, he said we. That's how you can tell a house Negro. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, what's the matter, boss? We sick. He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, let's run away, let's escape, let's separate, that house Negro would look at you and say, man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this? Where can I wear better clothes than this? Where can I eat better food than this? That was that house Negro. In those days, he was called a house nigger. And that's what we call him today, because we still got some house niggers running around here. This modern house Negro loves his master. He wants to live near him. He'll pay 3 times as much as the house is worth just to live near his master. And then brag about, I'm the only Negro out here. I'm the only one on my job. I'm the only one in this school. You're nothing but a house Negro. And if someone come to you right now and say, let's separate, you say the same thing that the house Negro said on the plantation. What you mean separate? From America? This good white man? Where you gonna get a better job than you get here? I mean, this is what you say. I ain't left nothing in Africa. That's what you say. Why you left your mind in Africa. On that same plantation.
Okay, it's longer, and like in the installation, it's a 7-minute, and I had it on a record player, and it's on a loop. Yeah, and I said there are 30 of these. No, I lied, 20 of these. But yeah, I think I'll end it there because of I could say more, but yeah, I'll end it there.
Okay, thank you so much, Jared. Thank you for sharing your work, both what we have here at the museum and from, like I said, your broader repertoire. So now, everybody, I'm going to open it up for Q&A. So if you would like to if you have any questions for Jared, you can type them in the box and I'll make sure that he gets them. While I give everyone a chance to do that, I guess I'll kind of kick it off. You mentioned, and I think this is one of those moments I actually wish I were in the gallery so that people could see, but this is my tantalizing encouragement to get everyone who can to come down here before April 25th. So you mentioned the curator who encouraged you to show all of the Planned Parenthood series together in kind of smaller form. And on our wall, they're in a grid. And when I've taken people through that space, no one recognizes it as being about Planned Parenthood until they get really up close or until they read the didactic text. And I'm interested in that response from visitors and wondering why it was important for you to kind of recede back and show the community a little more, and your kind of feeling about that response that, if people do what they sometimes do in museums and kind of buzz by, that they might not get it. So kind of a 2-part question, thinking about telling a little bit more about why it was important for you to recede and show the larger context, maybe make the Planned Parenthood smaller, and 2, how people might react to it if they're not quite understanding or grabbing onto that.
Yeah, well, one that I should say, David he's at Silver Eye, Osiric, I believe is, I may be mispronouncing it, but Silver Eye, amazing gallery. I recommend everyone, when you're not at the University of West Virginia Museum Gallery, check out Silver Eye. Yeah, I think it's important to think of it like the totality of it. I think that's it. The labor was there and I did that, but it's like, oh no, I think we just hold on to these ideas of artists where it has to be one way. And if it's not this way, then it's a failure. And that's not, at least for me, it's like, what's the goal? The goal isn't to, puff my chest and be like, I did all this work. The goal is to get people to talk about the ideas. And I think, I do think the ideas are important, not my work. And so, so you have, I think that, so I definitely want to give David credit. And I guess in terms of kind of going back and thinking about because it's really not, I think it's not about that space, right? So this is in Hamilton, Ohio. This is like deep, deep, deep red territory. And this is just like kind of holding on. And you realize again, I think, I love the fact that they're called health centers. They're not called clinics, they're called health centers, because what they do is provide basic women's health. And who is it for? It's for the community. It's for everybody. And so I think it's important to really emphasize that. And I should say one thing I didn't mention. So there were 26 when I began, but now there are 18. So they shut 8 down, and it just, it seems odd, like these compassionate conservative people who want to shut down basic women's health care. It seems a bit of an oxymoron to me, but especially so like in Hamilton, like they don't provide abortion services, and so it just seems so odd. So, but to me, to answer your question and to be a little more concise, sorry, is that yeah, I think because it's about the community that these health centers support.
Yeah, and I think, and I will say, just as someone who's now taken people through the galleries several times, I think people actually really appreciate that because they start to see that this is part of the fabric of everyday life. It's not, you know, some monstrous thing in their community that I think is sometimes how we see it in the news when we see the, you know, the protesters and that sort of thing. So I think it's actually a really compelling way to draw people, some of whom are very sympathetic to the mission and politics of Planned Parenthood and others who aren't. I think it's a very compelling way to draw both sides of that spectrum in. So I think it's a really good piece for creating this kind of dialogue. So I thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah.
And so my participants are letting me down on Q&A, so I'll just toss you another one unless anyone else has something burning. But you also mentioned, you know, we're a university museum, you work at a university, and you a couple different times here you talked about, you know, being a graduate student, being a teacher. And I just wonder if you could maybe be a little bit more explicit about the role of mentorship in your career and the kind of role of both being a student and being a teacher, and maybe if you have any kind of profound words of wisdom from those experiences on either end, or what approach you take to being in either of those roles.
Yeah, I always say like the secret that they tell rich people they don't tell everybody else is mentorship. Like you won't, I don't see how you get by without it in this world. And so, you know, mentors come in all different shapes and sizes. One of my favorite mentors I had when I documentary days at CNN was this old curmudgeon Jewish guy, Andy Siegel. And Andy would always try to put me in my place. And he'd be like, you Ivy League type think you know everything. And I thought I was arrogant and I didn't know anything. And he'd always you realize that Andy loved me and like he really set me straight and really put me where I needed to be put. And so but you look for these people and they come in so many, you know, it's yeah. So I've had mentors obviously in grad school. There's this guy, Mark Dion, he's an artist. And Mark, I was in his mentor group. And I always say like if it wasn't for Mark, I wouldn't have got through grad school. And so it's like people like Mark and his mentorship. And so as a result, when you have these relationships, even now at OSU, they give you a faculty mentor. And I'll be honest, I had one, it wasn't clicking. And I was like, I need somebody else. And it worked, you know, you're gracious about it, you're not rude. And I had this guy, George Rush now, who, once again, someone I need people who are quick to be like, you're wrong, don't do that. And it helps me and I listen and I respect George. He's a painter, not a photographer, but a painter. And I feel so, and I just say one more because I feel like I'm mentioning a lot of men. There's so many women, but there's a woman, Dana Hoey, who's in grad school, another mentor who I felt like it was one of the first people who knew kind of the both sides, so they could talk about photography in depth, about apertures. She was one of the ones who told me, she was like, why not use an 8x10? I was like, well, I'm using a 35. But it was like she knew photography, but conceptually her work is like very progressive and forward thinking. So it was like, okay, you don't just have to only do conceptual work or only do work that's like steeped in the medium of photography. You can do both. And so I think you have these people in your lives. And then as a professor now, you recognize the value. And so it's like, yeah, like I met with, I was actually talking to one of my graduate students who I'm his advisor, who's about to graduate. And it's fun. I'm blessed. I got my second shot finally. And I was like, I feel like this conversation needs to be had in person over a drink. And it's just like one of those things where, you know, he's just going through it. He's about to graduate. He's moving back to Chicago. And he's just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. It's like, oh man, I've been there. It's going to be tough, but you're going to get through it. And so it's like, you try to be there for your students because you realize how fortunate and lucky you are to actually like to be a mentor, to be a professor. So it's like, yeah, you cherish those relationships. And yeah, and that's how you learn, and you're learning from each other. It's amazing.
Great. No, thank you. And like I said, I always try and tease that out because we have a lot of students and professors who attend these events, and it's obviously the nature of our institution. And I appreciate you sort of, like I said, talking about that from both ends. So now our audience has perked up a little bit. So Cindy, who is actually one of our museum docents, asks, returning to the Planned Parenthood series, about if you would just talk a little bit more about your decision not to show protesters. She said it's interesting that you don't show demonstrators or protesters, and can you talk a little bit more about that decision? Why you didn't? Why you couldn't beat them there in that one shot where they show up?
Yeah, I think, where is that? That's Canton. Yeah, in Canton. Yeah, I think it becomes about them. I really was interested in making landscape photographs, but I feel like you're always giving yourself these, I like limits. And so I think one of the ways I was like, I always like, if we were in person, I would ask like the audience, I was like, can anybody name any photographers of color that photograph the landscape? And usually the answer, things get muted real quick. And it's just like, I was like, yeah, like, why is it that, that like I can't say these things like within the landscape? I was like, I want to make landscape photographs. And I don't want people. I don't want to, yeah, this idea where like, how do I talk about identity? How do I talk about subjectivity? But how do I do that by like not showing the human form or not showing the individual? And I think there are plenty of ways. I think one can do it in the studio, one can do it in the landscape. But I chose this time to like work within the landscape. And so, yeah, it's less that I, because obviously, as you can imagine, like I'm in big cities, there's people constantly around. And so then once it gets maybe kind of relating to like Walker Evans. So it's like, you have Walker Evans, but without Walker Evans, you don't have someone like Tomas Struth. I love Tomas Struth's work. And I have to say, one of the things I was really, really, really flattered to be invited to this is that like often when there's like group shows and things like this, as a Black person, I'm in like the Black person group show, which I'll do. I got no problem with that. But it's interesting to be like, that's like, yeah, of course, Walker Evans is a huge effect to me. And especially like people, so it's like, I'm thinking of Struth. I'm thinking like Struth's like streets are empty, and how like you can see the landscape in Struth's work. And so I'm like, yeah, very much. And I think people, which are amazing, and I love portraiture, I think they take away. And I think it's about these health centers and communities, but for me, it's not about the protesters. But I think maybe that's a project someone should do. Someone should photograph protesters. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I will say, from bringing people through the galleries, I think people appreciate that, because I've had several people say, the images that I have seen of Planned Parenthood are very, people protesting or people escorting women in or things like that. And so this is a different kind of feeling, and I think people really respond to that. So Todd, who helped to organize the exhibition, is actually has a question that relates a little bit to what you just said about your work of art in conversation with others. So both Walker Evans, but this exhibition that we have, this companion exhibition, has 3 other photographers as well. It's a group show. So Todd asked, does the experience of seeing your work appear in different exhibition contexts and with different photographers change how you see the project? Do you feel like it's a true conversation with other artists?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think that's what group shows really do. I think when they're well curated, there's like an underlying conversation, and I think it takes time. But one, like, as like a maker, it's like you want to be like, what are these connections? Like, so I know, whether it be Mitch's work or and is it Andrea? Yeah, like I'm familiar with some of their works, but it's like you don't see them necessarily in the context of like yourself. But you're like, okay, someone who's really smart, who's thinking about this a lot harder than me does. I was like, I need to go find that. Like, what is that? I see the link between Walker Evans, because I know Walker Evans, and I studied that a lot more. But I think it is there. And yeah, so I think the job is on the artist to find those connections. I mean, a lot of it could just be simply like the camera we use. I don't think it's just that, but I know these other people are also using a view camera, as Walker was. But you know, it's like, is it just formal? Is it conceptual? Is it both? And really thinking to yourself, like, yeah, like I say this to students all the time. Who are you in conversation with? And like, I'm like, it's rhetorical, but you need to write it down and think about it, and like come back to me and talk about it. Like, you're not making work in a bubble. They're your own ideas, and your own ideas are great, but they're connected to like all these readings and all these other histories that we're studying. And so it's like, okay, all right. So I'm like, I'm talking to this. I was like, Mitch, like, when I think of his work, I often think of like I think it's the family business. And so, but it's like, obviously the towers are there and like the smokestacks, and you think about like, yeah, once again, community, right? It's like, how is the landscape, how is it connected to community? So it's like, to me, that's like, I'm also talking about how is the landscape here connected to community. And yeah, so I just think it opens like veins, if you will, and one can go down. Yeah, so I think it does. I hope I answered that question.
No, I think you did. And like I said, I get the privilege as a museum educator of getting to watch people make those connections, because there's always what the makers and the artists think, and what the curators and organizers think, and then the people actually and people see that. They'll stand next to your work and Mitch Epstein's work and talk about the landscape of power and energy production, and how that ties into these streets and cars that are whizzing by these Planned Parenthoods that you photograph. So it's really, that's the part of my work that I love, is watching people make those connections in real time. And so I think it is successful, and I'm glad that that's a fun part of the work for you as well. So I think that let me just double check the questions one more time. I think we don't have any more open questions. We have a few more minutes left if anyone has anything else burning for Jared. But otherwise, I just want to send my sincere thanks, and once again, encourage people to get here in the next few weekends. One of the hardest things about this exhibition, both the Walker Evans and the In Conversation with Walker Evans, is that because we've done it in pandemic time, we haven't been able to invite and see as many people as we would like. So please, if you can get here in person. Jared was able to make the trip and see the work on the wall, and we're grateful for that. And so please come down here. For those of you who can't make it, you might have seen that you can virtually explore the exhibition on the museum's website. And we actually post the videos of these sessions there. So if you're interested in Mitch's work that you might not have heard of if you haven't stopped by the museum yet, you can hear Mitch talk about that in the virtual exhibition. And we'll post this session as well once we get it all captioned with Jared. And we have one more Lunchtime Looks of the semester, the first Friday in May, with Anna Alba, who is actually an art conservator. So she's going to give us an inside look at that process for a painting that's currently hanging in our McGee Gallery in our collection. So we hope that you join us then. And thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Jared, for your time and for your work. And we hope you all have a wonderful spring weekend. All right.